And so what I've observed frequently is that trauma therapists end up joining the patient in the trauma rather than establishing a boundary, as Dr. Cordes said, between themselves and the patient. And so when a therapist or a behavioral health professional does that, in some ways they rob the patient of the opportunity to experience that beauty.
Hello, and welcome to Disruptors at Work, an integrated care podcast. We're excited to discuss self-care as a professional in the field of behavioral health.
Hi, I'm Dr. Cory Cannady, Assistant Clinical Director of Elevate Behavior Services and special host for today's episode. I'm joined by Dr. Pauline T. Pablo, co-owner and Executive Clinical Director at Symphony Behavioral Health, Jeremy Henderson-Teelucksingh, Principal at Indigo Path Collective, and Dr. Gayle Cordes, Faculty Associate at Cummings Graduate Institute. Today's guests have an extensive background and expertise in behavioral health and self-care as a professional working in the field, which sets the stage for our conversation. Let's get started. How can professionals in the mental or behavioral health field effectively manage and separate themselves from emotional impacts of trauma and difficult experiences they encounter while still providing compassionate care?
Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, if we don't find a way to do that, we're either not going to provide that compassionate, trauma-informed care, or we're going to get ourselves sick. Or both. So I come to the faculty of CGI, I guess it's been about 9 years ago. And prior to that, over 40 years in both the corporate world and then when I pivoted into about 23 years ago into the mental health field as a trauma specialist and a DBH, working with all the disorders of extreme stress, I guess you would say. So I've had a lot of experience with stress, both personally and countless opportunities to address this with patients over the years. So in terms of what's needed, I think it goes without saying that we have to do our own work, all of us as professionals. And I see the difference in colleagues over the years who have not done their own work. Very few of us have ACE scores of 0 or 1. Those of you that know ACE score, adverse childhood experiences. So many of us come to this field because of our own origin stories and our desire to grow and heal. So I think we have to remember that their stuff is not our stuff. We have to develop and engage our internal boundaries. And boy, in these times, it's more important than ever to have those healthy habits, really monitoring your work hours, prioritizing your own sleep, prioritizing your playtime with your people. More important than ever, professionally and personally, because of the sort of chaos that, well, it's always, we've always had mad rulers and crazy times in history, but it's particularly kind of bigger, faster, scarier right now. So I think it's more important than ever that we practice what we preach. And I can say that over the years in my own independent practice, it was very important as I look back on it that I set rules for myself. So as integrated care pros, we all know that chronic stress increases chronic inflammation. Inflammation is at the root of morbidity and mental health and medical disorders. So turn down the inflammation, guys. The body and the brain can heal, but we have to turn down the flame. So those are just some thoughts I have on that question, Cory. Dr. Cannady, thank you.
I didn't realize, Dr. Cordes, that we have such a similar background, because I too spent a few decades in corporate America before pivoting into mental and behavioral health. And one of the, I think within the corporate world, we fail to recognize the amount of trauma that people bring into the workplace and how those traumatic parts rub up against each other in the workplace and cause friction between people where they probably don't have friction if they didn't have those parts. So working with clients and patients around trauma is incredibly important. And I know for myself, as someone who has done the work that Dr. Cordes is talking about, it's a journey, and it can be a really beautiful journey of healing that a patient or client goes through, but they have to go through it. And so what I've observed frequently is that trauma therapists end up joining the patient in the trauma rather than establishing a boundary, as Dr. Cordes said, between themselves and the patient. And so when a therapist or a behavioral health professional does that, in some ways they rob the patient of the opportunity to experience that beauty. And that's something that I keep in mind. Not I'm there with my patients. I'm in it with them, but it isn't mine. And it's one way that I really establish my own self-care routine, is to recognize that I can be there for them and I can help be a guide. I always tell my patients I'm like a museum guide, right? I'm gonna point out the brush strokes, the frame, the color of the paint, even maybe that little tiny white dot in the little corner of the painting, but they created it. And so my job is to help them explore it, rather than to become a joint artist in it. And then it allows that painting to be beautiful to them as they progress through their treatment, and it develops what I've seen as more, there's additional meaning and also the opportunity then for post-traumatic growth. But I think as clinicians, if we get in there and assume the trauma as our own, not only are we going to be ill, as Dr. Cordes says, but we're also, potentially permitting less, impairing health outcomes for the actual patient.
Yeah, it's be with it, be the observer. I love that museum guide metaphor, Jeremy, but not in it. We're part of our role is to be a purveyor of hope, and to have done our own work allows us to set that aside and just be present to the work, kind of hold space for the work of the other. So, agreed.
So both of you kind of touched on self-care, which brings us to our next question, which is, how does incorporating self-care into your routine impact patient outcomes?
Dr. Pablo, we haven't heard from you. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Oh, I think is she frozen?
Yeah, maybe she is.
Yeah. Well, while we're working on that, I kind of piggyback on what we were just dialoguing a little bit about, and that is, I've always, I've come to understand in, a couple of decades of this work, that we are emotional regulators. It sort of segues from what we were just talking about, Jeremy, that for a patient. So if I'm not practicing what I preach, if my nervous system is dysregulated, they're going to feel it. And especially with trauma patients, which is what I spent most of have and continue to spend time working with, there's a hypervigilance to threat. And if we are dysregulated, that's picked up. We feel it in general, but certainly that population is you're not going to feel safe. So I think without an essential felt sense of physical and emotional safety, the patients may not even come back, and that's not okay.
Yeah, and the idea around how the incorporation of self-care for the therapist or the behavioral health practitioner, I think is incredibly important. And I say that because this concept just literally blows my mind, as one would say, which is when we're delivering care, we don't have pills, we don't have things that we're putting into the person's body. It is our brain, providing care to the brain of another person. And so that to me is just profound, because if we have clinicians whose brains are not healthy, then we have an unhealthy brain delivering care, treatment to an unhealthy brain. So as clinicians, our brains have to be healthy. And that comes through, we could sit here and list off 100 different qualities like diet, exercise, sunlight, and sleep, right? We know that those are what I call the four horsemen of health. But there are other aspects to this that are just as important, like having a conversation with yourself, right? Talking to yourself about different things that you're experiencing in life. I think that's very important. It's very useful for me. And I always tell the folks that I work with, I'll never ask you to do something I don't do myself, right? And so there's some truth in terms of my big conversations with myself when they just pop up. But there are other aspects that I think we miss as clinicians. So we frequently talk about boundaries, and we often describe boundaries as what's okay and what's not okay in the context of my relationship with you. But we don't always talk about what is the safe distance from someone that I need to be from them to love them effectively. And even more rare of a conversation, I think, for therapists in particular, is what are my boundaries with myself? What is okay and not okay in the context of my relationship with me? And I think that it's important for us I think of those things as self-care. And I think it's important for us to practice those as an element of self-care. But I think it's also equally important for us to demonstrate those as self-care for the people that we work with, because we can spend hours talking about exercise and the benefits, and we all know there are lots of benefits, but we also have these other kind of internal mechanisms that are so important about our relationship with ourselves, that make it possible for us to be present with someone else who is going through massive challenges, oftentimes with the traumas that they've experienced. And so if we can't be there because we are starting to enmesh ourselves with the client because there isn't a boundary, then we become less effective. And as Dr. Cordes says, we become ill ourselves. So I think of boundaries as an element of practicing self-care.
Well, I like that internal dialogue you're talking about, Jeremy. It actually, I don't know if you guys can see on here, if you can see my 8 C's. Anyone?
Will you read that to us? Because I can't tell what it says.
Well, in the trauma realm, I'm integrated in my approach in terms of therapeutic approaches, and obviously EMDR therapy is my first language, but I'm very interested in the somatic and the internal family systems models as well. So I have sort of this melange of approaches. But for me, and to this question, I think it's relevant: calmness, connectedness, curiosity, clarity, creativity, confidence, courage, and compassion. Those are the 8 C's from the IFS world of being, your self energy. You're talking about that internal, conversation with yourself. And I've always found that to be very helpful before any interaction. Sometimes you forget, but before any interaction with the other, particularly in our work, to just do a little check, like how much self energy is really online right now? Because if I'm not in a critical mass of that, then I'm not as regulated as I need to be. So what all do I need to do to be able to sort of ground in that? So I literally have my tea mug to remind me of, okay, all right, let's do the little internal inventory here. So much of this boundary, everything it starts it's the inside job, and not practicing good self-care. It's very tough to be in that space, and when you're sitting with others. So. Or when you're leaving all the sitting that you've done with others and trying to get to that rest and play with your people thing, which is so restorative for us. So. I see Dr. Pauline is back. Are you?
I am.
We lost you there for a minute. What do you have to say on all this?
Well, we have rains in the area, so the internet's just cutting in and out. I caught what you said a little bit there as far as your C's. For my company is called Symphony Behavioral Health, and we love music around here. What we do has nothing to do with music, but we have this thing called the sound check. So, and the idea is like before going on stage, before performing, you have to tune your instrument. So we do a little sound check. And what we do for ourselves is we do a little sound check before walking into homes, because most of our sessions are in the homes or community setting. And what me and Cory do is a little bit different from what you both do. Is we work with mostly children and adolescents diagnosed with developmental disabilities. So some of the trauma that happens isn't necessarily us working through trauma that our patients have currently, but some of it is happening in the moment during the session, because sometimes we'll have aggressive behaviors, combative behaviors, and that could be traumatic just for everybody, for us who are supporting the clients and also for the client who's experiencing, that meltdown in that moment. So what we try to do is have that sound check to make sure that, you know, we have the training, we know we have the tools that we need before going into that session.
Oh, that's
Absolutely.
beautiful. I don't, emotional regulator thing, so critical in the work that you do with
And
both
as
Dr. Pablo and Dr. Kennedy in a real time sense with that.
as cliche as it might sound, I really like the metaphor that you can't pour from an empty cup, right? And that's the whole idea behind this episode, is that just because we're clinicians doesn't mean that we're immune to the traumatic experience that are brought to us, or to work through, or that we may have experienced ourselves. And so the idea of that, plus us as experts in the field hoping to reach the clinicians that may be struggling with how to deal with some of the things that are brought forth to them. And with that, sometimes self-care is not easy. What are some of the biggest challenges you've seen or faced in incorporating self-care within your lives? And then how can some of those challenges be overcome?
Boy, if I can jump, I just say taking on too many jobs. It's so easy in this. I mean, it happens in the corporate side, right, Jeremy? But
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they're forced on you. But certainly in our field, even when you are, running your own independent practice and so forth, that looking back, and I'm probably the only member of our panel here today that's already in the Medicare club. So I'm getting to that point where I have a little more control over, a lot more control over that. But just the demands of, work, home, parenting, elder care, finding, all the things that everybody's juggling, and the hurrying. Oh my gosh, looking back over the years and thinking, like, just trying to be present, is often so difficult to the actual moment. So, I've got a mantra. I am one person. I am one person. And, I have learned that no is a complete sentence. It's been a long slog on that one. But, and I think we have to figure out our own, what I call manageability index. It's like, okay, if I have 100 pennies of energy for the day, um, what are the need to do's, and how am I going to get in some nice to do's, as well, and not always be running, just on the edge of empty or on fumes. So, yeah, I think the too much challenge has probably been what I would refer to it as, looking back, and it gets a little easier, guys. So there are positives to becoming a senior. All those investments that you've made, you deserve some dividends. So, just a few thoughts from me.
I agree with you that time is, when we're younger in our careers, I don't think we ever think that there's a loss of time, right? And we do so much, and it's so normal in our 20s and our 30s to be just going, going, going. It's where we're making friends, we're developing relationships at work, right? We're doing all these different activities to kind of grow our careers. And what we don't do a lot of at that stage of our life is this idea of um, recognizing where we're putting our energies and what that actually means. for ourselves. Oftentimes, what I bring to my therapeutic relationships is a lot of the corporate stuff because it is very translatable. And one of the aspects that we have to remember about working adults, about adults in general, is that about 80% of our adult awake time is spent working.
Mhm.
So if you are working 12 hours a day, you don't really have a lot of time for rest. And I usually chart this out with people, for myself and with others, because if you're going to, I like the idea of the pennies. I use the idea of a budget. If your budget is that you only have so many hours, how much time are you going to spend to get ready in the morning? How much time are you going to spend laying in bed at night, just giving yourself that silence before you go to sleep? Because it's got to be accounted for in your budget. If you don't account for it, it's not going to happen. Just like in corporate America, we say if you don't measure it, it doesn't matter, right? And so the budget itself becomes incredibly important. And we as clinicians require that budget as well. When we think about the time that we spend with our clients and patients, that's not all the time that we're working for that client and patient. We have notes. Many of us are thinking about what we're going to do. What is the plan? Where are we going next, right? What's the next step? And all of that has to be accounted for in your actual budget of time. By the way, then when we think about going home at night, how much time are we going to cook? If you have children or family living with you, how much time are you going to spend with them? But very importantly, where's your time for yourself? Because as we know, not everybody gets energized by taking care of everyone around them in a constant kind of basis. We need time to care for ourselves as well. And so that pouring from the empty cup almost is like pouring back into your cup. Cory, I don't know if I'm mixing the metaphor up there. I don't know, but it's an idea of how do we actually purposely, intentionally spend time on us.
Right. Yeah. The metaphor is just, what can I do to fill my cup up so that I can give back? So yeah, you had it right for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Works for me. I like that.
Yeah, I love that metaphor as well. I will just echo everything that you had both said, and I'm taking notes as well because I do have a 3-year-old toddler, and I think my top challenge would be time. My co-owner is my husband, so a lot of the time we spend together, it's work related. So we literally tell each other, let's clock out and let's actually have dinner and not talk about work. And then let's clock in to not working, clock in to being with our child. So a lot of it is that time management. And without having that balance of it all, it adds to that just that allostatic load, and next thing you know, our body's aching, and we can't really pinpoint where those aches and pains are coming from, but it's from just the stress and not being able to just reset.
Yeah. Oh, and the investment for those of you that have the little ones, this intergenerational paying it forward investment in the development of your sweet little 3-year-old. That time and attention is so critical. We certainly know so much about that now from a neuroscientific standpoint, neurobiological standpoint. So yeah, making sure that as you're working out your own algorithm, your own manageability index, that you guys are investing in that, and all of those out there listening that are parenting. It's so critical. Yeah.
So not only could we be exhausted from the things that we're doing every day, from being with our family, from meeting with friends, being social, things like that. Sometimes we just have really difficult sessions as well. So what are some strategies you use to manage emotional exhaustion so that you don't reach your breaking point as a clinician?
I keep jumping first. You go first, Jeremy.
Yeah, I will. Thanks. I think I do some things that are maybe common or maybe uncommon, but I think that for me, I have to move my body, number one. And so I move around to release that energy. For me, this is a very spiritual practice as compared to something super scientific, but I'm sure there's maybe some science behind it. But I move my body and to let that energy kind of disconnect from myself. I also use behind me, I'm not sure if you can see, but there's a singing bowl. So I use a singing bowl to kind of, and a bell is there to just kind of create a different sensory experience, right? So it takes me out of the experience that I was just in and utilizes, I guess it is scientific, I'm utilizing my senses to, move into another space. I may even light a candle, something along these lines that help to just move me to the next space. And I think that's really an important, not my strategies in particular, but strategies in general are important for clinicians because we're often seeing people back to back. And if we had a very heavy session and we have someone that's coming in right behind them, they also deserve for us to be free of those energetic strands that might be holding us to the previous client. And so that's how I do it is by giving myself some of those kind of more Eastern, I guess, philosophical practices of releasing energy.
I love that, Jeremy. I will piggyback on that because it's funny. I, was thinking a little bit about this, and it's sort of like, the thing's just popping in my head. But water was a component of, if it was the last client, it would be like take a shower, walk, move, walk, discharge that energy. But
Yeah.
and taking a shower, and that kind of has been a practice over the years. I shifted to the nighttime, and just sort of that. There is a sort of spiritual cleansing, but the physical experience too of the water. So. Putting yourself in water, moving, those are so critical. And there was a water component with in the years of a lot of in-person back-to-back where I literally would go take a walk and even between sessions and wash my hands in cold water. There's a component of rinsing off your hands in cold water that can also be helpful in sort of releasing all of that. I have to say, one of the benefits of all my training and the tools that I use in trauma therapy come in handy because that little bit of self-guided EMDR has come in handy on many occasions. There's a component of that for you, any listeners that aren't familiar with it, of the phase 3 of the 8 phase assessment phase. So it's like identifying, okay, what's the triggering thing, whatever was going on in an extremely emotional encounter session. And this, I think, would probably be true too, thinking about you, Dr. Pablo and Dr. Cannady, especially if you've got a full-on sort of reactive situation that you've just had to handle with the kiddo. But it's like, okay, what's the worst part of that? What thought am I holding about myself? Just a little bit, and literally the bilateral stimulation of walking or tapping this very quickly. And oftentimes it would just release, but it also sometimes would be helpful. It just connect to something, and it'd be like, oh, I'm attaching that, that memory thing that happens, with EMDR and kind of rewiring. Oh, that was activating me because of blank, something. And it's like, oh, let that go. And so that was my secret weapon and has been over the years, especially the years when it was back to back to back and seeing, 8 or 9 people in a day. So
That's a great secret weapon. And it's funny because we don't necessarily label it as bilateral stimulation, but part of helping a client calm down would be, okay, let's get on the swing, or I'm literally holding you because you're hurting yourself. Let's rock together. And at that point, it could look like we're helping them self-soothe, but we're also self-soothing ourselves. And it just works both ways in that way. And also, I want to echo what Jeremy had mentioned with I have a Tibetan singing bowl as well and yoga mats everywhere. So I've manipulated my environment so that I can just easily go to the places where I can just reset and relax my body. I believe there are scientific research out there for the Tibetan singing bowl and like the vibrations and the specific uh, pitch or tone. I don't have it offhand, but I know there's science to that.
Yes.
I was just thinking about, sorry to interrupt you, Cory, that I was just thinking about in all of this, um, we talk about bilateral stimulation, but we talk about like shaking back and forth, right? When something happens, that shaking or like utilizing a vibration plate, right? A lot of times, like chiropractic offices, you'll see the vibration plate, like all of these EMDRs, this bilateral stimulation, and there are a lot of different practices that use this back and forth kind of movement of the regulating the nervous system. And I think coupling that with our senses, right? Like when we're taking care of ourselves, all three of us had mentioned somehow a sensory change. And so how energy and information is going into the kind of shaking the healing piece, and then, having the change in sensory experience. Yeah.
I was just going to say, as a behavior analyst, fascinated by the idea of the change in environment and what you can do to change that environment, to make it more rewarding for yourself. I know for me, music is kind of my self-care go-to, putting on headphones that kind of make everything else quiet and can match the feeling that I'm feeling by the song that I choose. Whether it's something calm to bring me back down from a very high magnitude situation versus, maybe I was really bored during part of that, then I might turn on something really heavy and really loud and, to get me pumped up for the next session. So I think there were commonalities, as Jeremy pointed out, between all of our answers. And one of those, as you said, was the sensory input, and the other being, some sort of change in environmental stimuli. So that was pretty cool.
I love what you brought up there, Cory, in terms of that. It's like, it's not always do you need to downregulate. Sometimes you need to upregulate. That's an excellent point. Yeah. And that, that whole, I don't want to get off onto too many tangents here, but that whole, like any of you that are familiar with heart math, that technology that's tied to measuring heart rate variability and using breath work, to shift out of the red to the, to the green and all that. But then there's some new wearables that are coming out now that I'm kind of intrigued with, sort of a third generation, like that Apollo Neuro, where it's literally your tools are tuned into your heart rate variability and, and assisting with all these things that we've been describing that we've learned to do. So it'll be interesting to see where all this goes in terms of, technology. Well, these technology aids, in addition to our wonderful sound bowls, I love those, and the candles and the music, all of this. So it's very interesting. A lot of different options, and finding finding the tools that work for you is so critical.
Absolutely. Lastly, what advice would you give other professionals trying to begin or trying to increase their self-care practices?
I think one of the things that I would contribute to this is really asking ourselves, what's preventing me from from making myself a priority, making myself, it's one of the things in our profession that I think is challenging across integrated care. So not just on our behavioral health side, all the way across, is there's so, it never ends, the care is needed across, our patient loads across the world. And so, what's getting in the way of me doing it, identifying that. And sort of what Dr. Cummings would say, find the implicit. What's good about me not doing this? Because there can be, someone like, that need to be the rescuer, and we all have to be very cautious, I think, about that. So I think that's probably the first step. And it could be a lot of things out there in the environment, but again, remember, no is the complete sentence. So those are just some internal, and to Jeremy's point earlier, the internal dialogues of what's getting in the way of me doing this, and what's potentially good about me not doing this. What's my secondary gain? So,
yeah, thanks for that.
Dr. Pablo, would you want to add? I have a couple of thoughts.
I'll just add a little bit. Yeah, definitely my advice would be just be kind to yourself.
Mm.
Just acknowledge that you're not
Yeah.
perfect. You don't have all the answers, and you can seek support, and it's okay. Another thing is to just utilize behavior momentum. So us behavior analysts, we call it behavior momentum, and that's when we kind of set ourselves up for success by picking the easier tasks first. So if it's easier for you to eat an ice cream as as something that'll, make you feel better, do that. And then maybe exercising is a little harder to engage in, but that will also make you feel better. Then plan that out after. I know a ice cream first, then a workout later. But whatever makes you feel more successful, I would just advise for you to utilize that behavior momentum and also manipulate your environment so that it is easier for you to access those things that you need. Yeah.
I think
I'd,
that's
I'd add two like broad categories. The first is invest, and I do mean financial investment, just not just an investment of time. Like I believe that we need to, um, well, I'm back on budgets, aren't I? We need to look at our budgets and we need to
That
figure out
kind
how
of
much money we're literally going to spend on our health
Mm,
because it does cost
Mhm.
us money. A gym membership, if that, Dr. Pablo, is easier than running outside, right? Then you need to get to the gym to get on the elliptical, let's say, as compared. So,
mm-hmm.
there are people who have allergy or asthmas that it's not going to be, running outside isn't going to be a great solution for, where a gym environment would be better for. So there, but that takes a financial investment. The second element here, I think, is around experimentation. And so you can experiment around what does and doesn't work. So when I started about, gosh, almost probably about 20 years ago, and finding myself in corporate America saying, where am I in my life? And wondering how how do I care for myself through this situation? I first thought, well, how do I care for other people? How do I demonstrate love to someone else? And of course, it always reminds me of my grandma whenever I ask, something like that. And so I started just stroking my arm, and that was like my first step in my self-care journey. Now, fast forward years later, and I stumble from across a device that was recommended to me by a supervisor called an alpha stim, which is this device, the alpha stim,
Oh
this
yeah,
device,
I
it's
have it.
little,
I've got all these
oh,
gadgets in my files. Yeah, it's
you and
interesting.
me both.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's an important thing because that is an experiment. If you've never used one of these things before, and then all of a sudden you've got these clips to your ears, and this device is creating alpha waves in your brain, which cause relaxation, ultimately. Um, but that takes investment as well. So there's experimentation with things that you might have never thought you'd even consider, or you stumble across it, right? And there is something that actually really works for you. I mean, just as a side note, my spouse is also a medical provider, and he he was like, "Heck no, I'm not putting that thing on my ears, and I'm never gonna do that." And now I can't get him off of it, right? And so I can't get my time, with the alpha stim. But I think it's finding, it's being very curious about
Yeah.
the advances that are happening all the time, and seeing if those actually work with what your needs are, because you don't know until you know. And yeah, and by the way, I'm not doing a commercial for Alpha Stim here. I'm just saying it is one,
Well,
a mechanism that works really well.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, well,
awesome.
and you bring up a good point. I think this ties back to doing this. What works for us, and I love the grandma thing. Grandmas are such an amazing resource. I can just tell you that comes up so often. I'm sure you that grandmother, but there's just this whole lead by example. It's like
Mhm.
what we're doing and how it's impacting us. It is also, it is an example, to those in our care and to our loved ones. So it just kind of is this loop that goes around in such a positive way. I would add one other thing from my department here, and that is do not forget to laugh. The laughter, I mean, physiologically, what goes on with a really healthy laugh is an antidote to stress. It is just is. So it's like that old laughter's the best medicine is not wrong. There is research on that. I think it was Norman Cousins or whatever, but we really need that now, So find the laughter and don't forget to laugh.
My
That
advice-
one's free. We don't
Oh
even
yeah,
spend
that's free.
that necessarily, unless you're streaming comedies. I guess may have to invest.
Just one more thing to add, especially, just given the times. Sometimes we feel that we're just things are out of our control. So
Mhm.
I work with underserved populations, and I go in their homes and I see all the things that are missing socioeconomically, and just there are so many things that could be changed that I can't change in that moment while I'm in there working with the family. But leaving that home and then doing other things like advocating for systemic change outside of that session can also help with your own self-care, because then you don't feel so helpless or defeated and you feel like you're doing something else.
I love that empowerment. Yeah, feeling that. Then that's also so positive, inside and out. Mhm.
And I'll just add my advice to the end of this, which would be to find somebody that's done it before you. Find somebody that's been in the field. Find a mentor, find a friend, find a colleague that you can talk to. Figure out what they like, what they do, how they do it, and take notes from them.
Oh yeah, that's curious and connectedness of the 8Cs, Cory. I love that.
Full circle.
Yes.
All right. On that note, I want to say a big thank you to all our incredible guests for sharing your insights and your expertise today. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share. Let's keep disrupting healthcare together. Until next time.